Welcome back everyone. Today we're going to be making a super simple t-shirt with the option of adding a pocket. This pattern comes in multiple sizes and the link to download it is in the description. Other than that, thanks for tuning in and let's get right into the project. Getting started with supplies, you're going to want 2 yards of jersey knit or any sort of lightweight stretch material. You can get away with less than 2 yards, but I recommend grabbing a little bit more just in case you make a mistake. A ½ yard of rib knit fabric. This is a fabric that is going to be used on the neckline. And lastly, your pattern, and this pattern is available at properfitclothing.com. It's super easy to use and it comes in multiple sizes. All you have to do is print it off, tape it together, and cut it out. And here's just a quick overlook of what your pattern should look like after you tape it together. And once you have it all taped together, you can go ahead and cut the size that you're looking to make. And like always, all the links for the supplies and the pattern will be linked in the description below. After cutting, you're going to want to end up with one neckline panel cut on the fold, and this will be cut out of your rib knit fabric. One pocket panel if you choose to make a pocket tee, and this is cut out of your main fabric. And I'm using a different color just to make that pocket stand out a little bit. 2 sleeve panels cut out of your main fabric. And before you start cutting, you'll notice a line going across the pattern. This is to extend the sleeve out if you're looking for longer sleeves, or to shorten it if you're looking for shorter sleeves. One back panel cut on the fold out of your main fabric. This pattern also has a mark where you can extend it or shorten it, and this will adjust the overall length of your shirt. And lastly, one front panel cut on the fold out of your main fabric. And if you do adjust the length of the back panel, make sure you do the exact same to the front panel. Getting started with assembly, grab both your front and back body panel, place the right sides together, lining up the shoulders. And when you have them lined up, place a few pins in them and sew at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And before you start sewing, we're going to show you 2 methods that you can use on stretchy fabrics. The first one is a zigzag stitch, and this is done on your regular domestic sewing machine. This is going to allow for that seam to stretch without breaking the thread. The second method is using a serger, and the serger is going to cut and sew at the same time. They're used on all types of activewear and stretchy fabrics, and if you don't have one, I highly recommend grabbing one. And once you decide on which method you're going to use, go ahead and sew both of those shoulder seams. And to be clear, you do not need a serger. It's just really helpful on cleaning up those raw edges and making your overall project look really professional. Next, grab both of your sleeve panels, and what we're going to be doing is hemming the bottom, and this is marked on your pattern. So go ahead and add this marking to your fabric, and if you did make your sleeve longer or shorter, it's going to be the same marking. You just have to line the pattern up on the bottom of the sleeve. And once you have it marked, go ahead and roll over the bottom edge on that hem line, add a few pins, and you're ready to sew. And before you start sewing, we're going to show you 2 different methods on how to hem stretchy knit fabrics. The first is using a twin needle on your regular domestic sewing machine. This will allow you to straight stitch on stretchy fabric. The second method is using a cover stitch sewing machine. This is what you're going to see on most t-shirts bought in the store. This is a great machine to have if you're making a lot of active wear products. It's going to allow you to sew on stretchy fabric without the thread breaking. You can also add up to 3 needles on the top stitch for overall look and durability of your final product. And again, you do not need this machine. I just like to show you what's out there to take your projects to the next level. And if you are using the twin needle method, just place it in your machine like a normal needle. Put your machine on ZIG-ZAG. I had the length on 4, it doesn't matter what length, and the width on 0. And lastly, thread 2 spools of thread through your machine the exact same path and out your needles, and you're good to go. And we're going to be trying to sew directly on that inside edge, so that way it covers up that raw edge on the inside of your sleeve. And this is easier said than done. If you do not get directly on the edge, it's not a big deal. And another quick tip is to use matching color thread. This will hide any imperfections if the stitch does not come out straight. And go ahead and repeat this process for both sleeves. Next, we're going to be adding the sleeve to the body. Open the body up and place the right side of the fabric up so that way the armhole is open. And a quick tip to make sure that sleeve lines up perfectly, fold your sleeve in half and cut a diagonal notch in the top corner. This will give you the midpoint of your sleeve arch, and then you line that midpoint up with your shoulder seam. And once you have it lined up, I like to place a pin in the middle and on both ends. But if you prefer to add pins along that entire arch, you can totally do that too. And once you're done pinning, you're going to want to sew along that entire edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and you can either use a zigzag stitch or your serger. And I like to use that middle pin as a guide, so that way I can hold onto it and line up both the layers as I sew. And then go ahead and repeat this process for the other sleeve.
No one can say he's lived until he's loved. Well, go out and love someone. If I do, you told her? No.
And at this point, do a quick check, make sure that all the layers got sewn together, and you're ready to go on to the next step. And if you did extend the sleeve, it's going to come out more a little bit at the top, so don't worry if it looks different. Moving on to the pocket is optional. If you're not choosing to add a pocket, you can go ahead and skip ahead. The first step is to roll the top of the pocket over on the hemline and pin it down. And once you have it pinned down, we're going to add a stitch along that edge, and we're going to do it the same way we did the sleeves. Try to cover that inside edge. And I'm going to be using the cover stitch machine for this stitch. You can use the twin needle, or you can even use a straight stitch. This seam will not be heavily stretched like a side seam, so it's safe to use a regular straight stitch. Next, add a 1/4 inch snip into the bottom point of the pocket. This will allow you to roll the edges over and make it look nice and clean. And you're going to want to roll the bottom edges over before you roll the side edges over. And lastly, make sure you're rolling the edges over at the hemlines indicated on the pattern. And once you have all the edges rolled over and pinned down, you can either set this directly onto your t-shirt, or you can sew along the outside edge to secure these edges down. And I'm going to do one straight stitch along the outside edge, and it's safe to use a straight stitch because this is not going to be a heavily stretched area, so that thread won't snap. And make sure you sew within a 1/4 inch to the outside edge. And now that your pocket panel is complete, you can go ahead and set it on your front panel. And it really comes down to preference on which side you want to place it. I like to place it on the right side, about 3.5 inches up from the armhole and 2.5 inches in. And this is measuring at the top of the pocket. When you're satisfied with your placement, pin it down and sew along the outside edge. And if you added stitches before, go ahead and follow along the exact same stitch all the way around the outside edge. And again, you're going to want to do a few tack stitchings at the top of the pocket because that's going to have the most stress. Moving on to the next step, we're going to be sewing up the side seams, and you can either hem it like you did the sleeves, or I'm going to show you a different method after you sew the side seams, so that way you can get one hem stitch all the way around that bottom edge. Either way works great. It really just comes down to what method you prefer. So moving on to the side seams, we are going to do the side seams first, and then we are going to hem the bottom. Start by placing the right sides together and lining up the arm seams. We are going to be adding a stitch all the way along that side from the bottom all the way up out that sleeve. And it's really important to make sure that you have the sleeves lined up at the edges and the seam, and then also the bottom lined up. And once everything is lined up, go ahead and sew all the way through that edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Go ahead and repeat this process for the other side seam.
Yes.
You mean marriage?
Of course.
You've got a nerve.
Got several. They're all functioning normally.
Do you realize what you've said?
And now that the side seams are complete, we're going to go ahead and add a hem to that bottom edge. Roll the bottom edge up about 1/2 inch and add a pin to both of the side seams and both of the centers of the front and back panel. And the biggest thing to note here is to make sure the hem is the same width all the way around. Once you're satisfied with the width, we're going to sew it exactly how we sewed the sleeve. We're going to try to sew directly onto that inside edge. And again, this can be done with a cover stitch sewing machine or a twin needle on a regular domestic machine. Also, if you prefer the look of the raw edge on the bottom of your shirt, you don't have to add this hem. It's totally up to you on what look you're going for. And I think this method of hemming the bottom is a little bit easier because you can do it all in one stitch, so that way you know the bottom is going to turn out even. Moving on to the neckline, go ahead and place the right sides together and stitch along the short edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And we will be using a straight stitch for this seam. Now we're going to roll the edges over with the wrong sides touching, and this is going to create a nice clean neckline. And I do recommend pinning these edges together so that way they're lined up when you sew it onto your shirt. And when you have your neckline ready, what we're going to do is line up the seam of the neckline with the shoulder seam. Pin those seams together and stretch the other side directly across to the other seam. And the neckline is actually smaller than the head hole. This is because you stretch it as you sew it, and that rib knit will cinch back to its original size and fit around your neck nicely. And I only recommend using 2 pins because you are stretching it as you're sewing it, and if you have more pins in there, it's not going to turn out right. And once you're ready, make sure all the edges are lined up and sew along the outside edge. We are using a serger. I recommend using a serger or a zigzag stitch. And there you have it, your neckline is looking good. Just do a double check to make sure that all the layers got sewn together. And you can add a top stitch all the way along the outside edge. It really depends on what look you're going for. And if you do this, I recommend using a twin needle or a cover stitch machine. And lastly, if you're looking for a super fitted look, all you have to do is sew in the side seams by flipping the right side out and sewing in just a little bit at a time until you get it down to your perfect fit. And you're gonna wanna sew this with the curve of your body. And that is going to complete your t-shirt. Thank you so much for watching and supporting the channel. If you ever have any questions, feel free to send me a chat on properfitclothing.com. We're going to keep the videos coming at you, so we'll see you next time.